Hey, hey, good people. Fervor Voice listeners, a product of Fervor LLC. I am Jody Maynard, wife, mom, educator, mentor, coach, and now podcaster. I'm doing my work, encouraging and empowering my brave and brutally honest listeners to start from within, because that's where you'll find what's hidden. That's where the work is. Join me for my weekly words as I encourage and empower those to do better, be better, and to live better. Come on, y'all, let's do the work. Hey, good people, I'm back. This is episode 6 of Fervor Voice. This episode is ego. So, ego, we're going to talk about that and talk about just kind of the breakdown of it a little bit. I think a lot of times when we talk about that word ego, it's in a negative connotation. And it really, that we'll just talk about it. All right, so in starting off with ego, I think the most important thing to do, let's just kind of define what ego is, right? So when you think about ego, you tend to think of, I think people tend to think of the attitude, just like an attitude, but not in a good way, just like cockiness. It seems like when we say things like, well, that's his ego getting in the way, or that's her ego getting in the way, it kind of aligns with cockiness for some people. I don't align it that way because I think there's so many moving parts to ego. I'm out here, I'm outside, so it might get, I don't know, you might hear the wind coming through. I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, sorry about that if that's what you hear. um with the ego, there's some components to that. It's much more than just an attitude or what somebody tends to do that's too much for other people. It's so much more complicated than that. It has different moving pieces and parts to it. But in general, there's just kind of a part of your ego that's, if you believe in, the Freudian theory, but there are just some parts of it, whereas it's just instinct. Part of your ego is actually that instinct. You don't even think about it. You just kind of do it. It's like getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth. Like that's just a given. You don't even think about that. Well, that might not be a good enough example. Breathing. You don't think about breathing. That's just instinct. Babies come here. They're breathing. They start breathing. They kind of need a shock to make them start breathing, but that's just instinctive. You don't need to think about that. Just do it. There's also a component to your ego where there's reality to it. You know how on cartoons or something like that, where they'll show like the devil on one shoulder and then the angel on the other shoulder? It's kind of the reality piece to it, where you know what could happen. You know that this is real. You know that this actually exists. And then you have that good and bad. The good and bad part is basically that moral compass, that moral part that tells you, okay, that's probably not a good idea. I probably don't need to do that. Those things all go together and they all work together to create the ego. And there are probably even more components to it, depending on who you may ask or whose theory you believe in, whose theory you buy into. Me personally, if I can connect with it and it makes sense to me, that's kind of the theory that I do go along with. And I feel like this theory is one that makes sense and I can actually relate to it because I know some things that I've done and I'm like, oh yeah, I get where that's coming from. So with these different egos and the way they kind of line up, that moral piece of the ego, that's where it gets kind of sticky. So with the moral piece of the ego, everybody's is going to be different. So I think the biggest thing for me is the generational gap. When I look at different egos and things like that, the first thing I establish is their generation. Because when you think about a generation or Gen X, that's me. People born between the 60s and the 80s, the Gen Xers, they just generally tend to have a thought process that is kind of aligned. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying it's kind of aligned. Gen Ys, the 80s and 80s, 90s, there's kind of a line a little bit. And I know that because I work with people who are in that era. And when I have conversations with them about certain things, it's not that they don't understand, it's that they really don't share the same value about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just trying to break down that whole generation situation because it's such a big part in moral compass that it just kind of has to be discussed. So that Gen X and that Gen Y, and then to me, Gen Y, Gen Z is kind of the same thing as those that are after um, the 80s and the 90s. It's just kind of close. I just feel like the Ys and the Zs are very close together because that's like my daughter was my son, but that's like my daughter and her cousins, my nieces and nephews. That's like them. They do they don't have the exact same opinion about things, but there are some things that are really and truly understood by them where it's just like, oh, no, no. Come on now, you know that. Have you ever noticed that with the younger folks, like, and I'm just saying this because, I'm in my 50s. But I'm saying when you work with the 20-year-olds, not all. Let me first say that I'm speaking in generalities. So not all, but you notice there's an overall different attitude about what they're willing to do and what they're definitely not going to do. Now, that could work in a sense. In a sense, I guess it just depends on where you work. But when there's literally an issue about something, just anything that needs to be done, and you're just standing around, not saying that you won't do it, but if there's something that needs to be done, is for the company, is for, whatever customers you serve. If you're just kind of standing around there, I get it, it's kind of not your job, I get that. But when it's not just instinctive to go ahead and do it because it's just got to be done, it has to be done. And no, it's not part of your process, no, it's not your step, but it just has to be done. Again, not all are that way, but it just seems it's just difficult when you look and you say to yourself, okay, I can't believe I had to have a conversation about that. But it's the generational gap. It's that gap. It's what they know or what they think they know or what they feel. And because of the way they were brought up, I really feel like they were brought up in that bubble where everybody gets a trophy. Maybe not all of them, of course, not all of them, but it was kind of that era where everybody got a trophy. And I think this era is even moving further towards that everybody getting a trophy type of situation. Now, that's just my opinion, and that's just what I have experienced. Again, that's not everybody, but the biggest situation I feel like is the generational gap between us as we live among each other. We're all getting older. People are generally living longer, so it makes it a little bit more difficult because those that are still around from 70, 80 years ago, even 90 years ago, there's a huge disconnect with those that are very young. Every generation tends to be much different. Every generation tends to have its own stamp. And this generation seems to be the generation of, hell no, I ain't gonna do that. That's what it seems like. I cannot verify, prove, I can't. But that's certainly what it seems like. I'm not even gonna blame it on ego. I'm not blaming it on ego. It's literally the age that we live in. Ego has something to do with it, but the age that we are living in now is literally like, no, not gonna do it. I think it'll bring about something bigger. I think it will bring about something greater at some point. Because if we think about it, the generations before these folks, if we had said that, we may be a little further along. So it's not always bad to be the hell no. That's not always bad. But it can, yeah, it can change some things. It can, because it just depends on who you're talking to. Because some folks don't play that, some businesses don't play that. And yeah, you'll find yourself in the same predicament as I was as a teen. Every job you have seems to send you packing. And if that's the case, you are going to have to come up with something that allows you to be your own creative self. The mouth is going to slow down. Trust me, I know, because you just can't do it. And my fears, my ego eventually started to conform into that person who had to keep their job. That's all I cared about, keeping my job. That is not what they care about now. These Y's and Z's, that's not what they care about now. And hey, that's on them. I'm sure, like I said, it's going to bring about something greater. I'm just not one of those believers that feels as though this generation is going to drive us into to a ditch. What bigger ditch could we be in? I mean, I just don't feel that way. So, yeah, that newness and that energy, I'm with it. I'm here for it. But as far as the ego goes and the things that we do with our ego, how our ego can support us, I think that a lot of times we miss out on what's so important about our ego. And our egos really and truly do give us a sense of self, that sense of self that allows us to be our own individual person. Without our egos, we're all the same. And I think individuality is really and truly important. And I think it's something that we all should fight to hold on to, because every activity, everything that you do, regardless of whether it's at home, at work, with friends, if you look around, if you sat at a table with 10 friends that you knew, or 10, obviously you know them if they're friends, but if you sat around a table with 10 people, everybody's bringing something different to the game. Everybody's got something different. Everybody can add something different. That's what's so important about ego and individuality. It's something that you need, it's something that you have to hold on to. If you have a neighbor who does not keep their house or their property up the same way you do, and because your ego is telling you that they need to do what you do with your yard, you get on the phone and you call the city. That's your right to do it. It's your right. But I'm just saying, does that have anything to do with what you have going on? What somebody is doing with their yard? I could see if it was a neighbor whose pets are always in your yard and who, drop, you know, drop their stuff in your yard and then go on back. That's different. But when you look at things like that, how we tend to allow our ego to take over because we're so concerned about feeling like we're getting trampled on. Those are the types of things that need to be concerning. That's when you need to exercise some discernment. That's when you need to filter out what really matters. Because our ego will have us thinking that we really got something we need to sink our teeth into. And it's usually not. It's usually not. When I get a call from, not a call because we really don't call, it's a lot of texting and a lot of emailing. I get emails or a text from work. I'm not concerning myself with it if I'm not at work. I'm not concerning myself with that. And I'm not concerning myself with that because I already put in the time that I told you I was going to put in. Now, I'm not being mean about anything. I'm just saying, if I've left, if I'm already off the clock, or if I'm already finished working, that's exactly what I mean. I mean that I've finished working. And if you have a question that's requiring me to go back in or dig in to what I've already closed out, then that's just something that's not going to get done unless it's a mistake that I made. I'll take ownership for a mistake that I made. But when we bring our work home, because we think that it's something that we're supposed to do, we're damaging our sense of self. We're damaging our own thought process. Things like this are things that the ego does control. Our egos can be something to make us or something to break us. Our egos can be something that is so far beyond that others just kind of can't tap in. There's such a large range for egos. It could really go on and on. But I think that it's important for us to consider the fact that egos are not only something that can deter, but it's also something that can protect. And when our egos protect us, they protect us in ways that save our health. They protect us in ways that save friendships. They protect us in ways that build relationships. Sometimes they can actually show people what you're willing to accept, to teach people how to treat you, that sort of thing. When I first started teaching, I felt like I was going to take on the whole school, that I was going to set an example, and soon enough, others would fall in line. Others would want to do that. Others would be encouraged by that. That was my ego. And that wasn't a bad position to be in. Because if you're a parent, that's the teacher that you want. That's the educator you want for your child. You don't want the one that's got that ego going, that's on burnout, that's saying, I'm going to do what I have to do to be here and not concern myself with anything else because I'm going to get the same paycheck anyway. That is not an ego that protects. That's an ego that's already destroying. It's already destroying who you are as an individual. Because when your ego is one that's protecting you, it is one that will allow you to be your best, but it will also protect you from being torn down. Very complex. You have to work at it, all of those things. But the ego is not there to shut people out. The ego is not a negative force. When you say that someone's ego, that term is kind of used a little bit too loosely because there's so many other things that go into making a person behave the way they behave, to act the way they act, and act on things when it's not really necessary. It is some ego, but it's also some personality, and it's also some hurt. It's also some hurt. So when I think about ego protecting, yeah, I think about not acting on that phone call or that email or that text because I'm protecting me. It's not about being mean, but I'm protecting me. When I think about ego protecting, I think about my son's death. And I think about how I started making decisions that had to do with my health, that had to do with what comes first. And sometimes those decisions do look harsh. Sometimes they do. But I don't need to do anything or put anything ahead of my own health or ahead of my own well being. And that didn't happen until after September 18th. Didn't happen until after that, because that's when I started to realize that what's going to happen is going to happen. I'm going to do my best within my space to do what I need to do. And after that, what's going to happen is going to happen. And I'm going to handle it. And that's all there is to that. I'm going to handle it. And that I know. I also judge less. So in judging less, you let people do what they do. Because most of the time, it doesn't even have anything to do with us. We're just so busy feeling like someone is going to say something, feeling like someone has taken advantage of us, feeling like we got the short end of it, it really has far less to do with anything than we tend to believe. But because of that piece, that ego piece, we start pulling in all kinds of other stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with it. We have to be careful with egos. We have to be careful with the negative and the positive side of the ego because it could make us and it could break us. It could make us or break us. Life's challenges and the way you succeed and overcome those challenges with your ego, if you're doing it correctly, if you're doing it with some work, if you're doing it with some discernment, it will balance. There's good and bad, just like you've seen on cartoons where there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. That's that good and bad. That's the good and bad. If you are doing it right with work, like I said, with discernment, you'll balance your ego and you'll grow yourself. And in growing yourself, you'll grow your life, every aspect of your life, and live a fulfilling life. That is the key. Balance. That's what I'm leaving you with today, with the word balance. Because without balance and that ego, that angel and that devil, if you can't figure that thing out, you make it harder on yourself than anyone else. Believe me when I say that. So I just want to leave you with that word of balance. Thank you for listening. I hope you were able to get much needed information out of this episode, and I hope you're even clearer on ego than you were before you tuned in. Thank you for listening. Bye.